Ekotürk'ten Saat Farkı'ndan merhabalar. Bu hafta Avusturya'nın başkenti Viyana'dayız. Viyana'da geçtiğimiz günlerde bir konferans düzenlendi. Burada İslam ve Avrupa'da Müslümanlar ile ilgili çalışmalar yapan kamuya ait dokümantasyon merkezi 2 günlük bir konferans düzenledi. Özellikle Arap Baharı sonrası İslamcılık, Avrupa'da Müslümanların karşılaştığı sorunlar ile ilgili alanında uzman isimler burada bir araya geldi ve bir konferans yapıldı. Bugün bu dokümantasyon merkezinin genel müdürüyle Feyza Fellhofer'la röportaj yapacağız ve hem konuyla alakalı hem konferansla alakalı hem de Avrupa'da Müslümanların karşılaştığı sorunlarla, İslamofobiyle alakalı sorular soracağız kendisine. Welcome Ms. Feyza Gümüşlüoğlu. Thank you very much for taking time for us.
Thank you.
First of all, could you please tell us about your center, the documentation center? When and why was it founded and what is the mission?
The Documentation Center was founded in July 2020, and it is founded as a fund of the Republic of Austria tasked with research and documentation on religiously motivated political extremism. There is a similar center here in Austria that is documenting right-wing extremism, and our mandate is to look at how structures might try and misrepresent or misuse religion for political gains that are against the democratic rule of law in Austria or also in Europe. And the aim is to have an informed debate, to have actual research results and facts and figures, to steer away from polemic or populist remarks, and to also ensure that the Muslim community in Austria can practice their faith free from any extremist influences.
Mm-hmm. We will talk about all those topics during the interview, but I want to also ask you a second. Your center just organized a very timely 2-day conference about mostly Islamism, especially after the Arab Spring. And you brought together some of the best experts in their fields. What are some conclusions you made out of the panel's presentations and discussions, I wonder?
Well, first of all, the goal with the conference was, after the first 2 years of our existence, to bring together renowned researchers in various fields of Islamic sciences and other studies to discuss what has happened in the field of religious extremism, Islamism, after the Arab Spring in various regions of the world. So we didn't just want to talk about Austria, we wanted to talk about what is it like from our point of view in country of origins, what are the developments. And so we tried to have a really broad discussion with a lot of perspectives from different researchers. And we also had, from the beginning, the goal was to gather all the academic experts in the field, look at what happened in the last 10 years, and what are current developments that are interesting to look further into as a research organization, which we are, and also what experts are telling us is happening on the ground according to their data. And I think one of the things that we saw in the last 2 days was that there is a lot of things being fluid in motion, and that developments are very interesting in a few fields. So we touched upon the question in the beginning: how can we study without any prejudice as religiously motivated extremism, without touching upon the right of freedom of religion, because that's 2 separate issues. Then we went to a few key players like the Middle Eastern countries, what is the situation there, and then we came back to Europe, so what is the influences between those regions. And I think one result we clearly have seen is that there is interdependence. So whatever happens, be it in the European continents or in the MENA region, since the world is globally connected, overall we saw that with the pandemic too, we need to keep an open mind on what is happening in the various regions and just talk with each other. I think that's also one of the results, that debate is very necessary. It's very necessary to talk with each other. and to discuss in an open atmosphere the results of various researches, and to not be afraid to point out where something is maybe going not very well, but also to point out where there's positive examples. And I think especially when we're talking about Turkey as a case study, the most interesting point was because we had experts from Turkey, but also from Europe, different points of views, but somehow we can meet in the middle and talk with each other. And I think that's a very important point to me.
Very good. Ms. Fellhofer, what do you think the prime challenge the presence of Muslims in Europe poses to the European governments and societies? Do you feel that Islam is more often than necessarily associated with violence and extremism? Don't you think that this association itself is a problem to tackle with?
What we can see is that the Muslim community is under pressure, but not just by any prejudices that might be out there, but also from the extremism Islamists themselves. And I think that's one of the most important points that we also saw at the conference in the last 2 days, that we need to ensure that everybody who lives in Europe, no matter their faith, no matter their creed, can live in Europe and exercise their rights within the framework of democracy and rule of law. And that's one of the tasks that we have as a documentation center, to document where things go against the rule of law, where things go against democracy, but then also to foster positive developments where people of faith can exercise their religion within the framework of democracy and rule of law.
Some observe that anti-Islam and anti-Muslim sentiments, as it's called, Islamophobia, let's say, have recently been on the rise across Europe. Do you observe this also? Do you share this observation? If yes, what are the reasons you think? Is it the economic burden of immigration, or pure racism, or is it anti-Islam itself? What do you think? What's your observation about this? And I will come to Austria in specific later on after this.
Well, I do think what we see in the data is that there is certainly some kind of discrimination against people of faith, but you need to be careful to not have the whole debate be polarized, because Muslims in Europe and Austria, that's one of the things that we as the documentation center are here for, to ensure that everybody can exercise their religion, and that extremist views, in whatever color they come, are not predominant. And that's, I think, the most important point also, because we are living in a very polarized world at the moment. Probably, again, you can see it in the last 2 years with the pandemic too. On different issues, people are very black and white, and we need to be more able to discuss with each other and talk about differences, but also similarities. And what we are seeing is that extremists tend to exploit the tendency to regard everything in black and white, and to what we need is to be open with each other and to really talk. And again, I'm coming back to the conference we just held, that's one of the things, an exercise in having a public forum, talking with each other and pointing out the things that are going well, but also the things that are not going well.
How is immigration, you think, from the Middle Eastern countries in Europe is affecting this or contributing to this ongoing crisis and problem?
Well, it certainly gives us, as I said, there's debate in the public realm, and probably challenges us, but for example, if you take Austria, Islam has been recognized as a religion in Austria since 1912. So that's a very important fact, that if you are a Muslim in Austria, your religion is recognized as an official religion, and that you are free to practice Islam in Austria as a faith.
Speaking of Austria, so I want to ask you specifically about Austria. Over 1,000 Islamophobic attacks were reported in Austria last year, according to a recent report on anti-Muslim racism. And some argue that these attacks escalated rapidly after the Austrian government released its controversial Islamic national map in 2021. Was it a good idea, do you think? What do you think about this, its impact on this rising attacks?
Well, you should know that the map, that map of showing where mosques in Austria are, is a university research project that has been around for the last 10 years. So the project has been refunded, also by the Documentation Center. And the research project, again, it's a 10-year-old research project that is actually done also by people who are from the Muslim community themselves, so backgrounds are diverse there. And the goal has always been to make visible the diversity of the Muslim community in Austria, just as you have the same for the Catholic part or any other religion. And to make Muslims feel like they're part of the society, which they are, because Islam is a recognized religion. But what also is important is to then look at the structures that might have extremist views and put pressure on certain groups within the Muslim community to separate and segregate from the Austrian society. So we have the case, for example, of an imam in a mosque here in Vienna who was preaching to keep separate from the Austrian society. If you have a problem, he was saying that if you have a problem amongst yourselves as Muslims, don't call the police because the police are kufr. And that is a problem for society overall, because we are supposed to live together and have the same structures, use rule of law again, and democratic values. And so that is hindering a good, peaceful living together of Muslims and non-Muslims. So that's something that you need to be aware of. And what we as the Documentation Center, what we want is a very neutral discussion about this, and to have no extremism from whatever side. I can guarantee you that extremism from one or the other side is never a good thing, and we're working actually towards a cohesion of society where you can live together no matter what your faith.
Ms. Fellhofer, I want to ask you, because it was also mentioned several times during the conference, when we say extremism, for instance, for example, a lot of people in the West think that Muslim Brotherhood as an organization, as a whole organization, is also an extremist group. For example, how do we differentiate, or how do we categorize a group extremist or not? What is the current policy of the government here, for example, or your center?
I can just talk about my center and also what we are doing, because that's exactly the question that we have been dealing with ever since we were founded 2 years ago. How do you research and how do you document religiously motivated political extremism? Where do you differentiate to views that are not covered with the extremism? You need to separate. So you need to draw a line, basically. What do you look at? What is regarded as something that might be problematic within a democratic state, and what can exist within a democratic state? And so what we did, first of all, we established together with our advisory council, it's 10 experts from various academic fields, a working definition on the term political Islam. And then from there on, we also went a little bit further and we looked at the Austrian constitution, the principles, the fundamental rights that are within there. And we basically are saying that any views or beliefs that are going against, for example, pluralism of opinions or freedoms that are granted by the fundamental rights, by the constitution, that are trying to dissolve that, that is something that we look into a little bit deeper. And just to give you an example again, I'm trying to be a little bit more precise with the examples. We are not looking into any theological discussions. We are not looking into the religion itself, because that's not our mandate. Our mandate is to look where somebody pretends that something is required religiously, but actually might not be. And it's just used for gaining power, leveraging power. And so again, the example that I say that with the imam in the mosque that was saying keep separate and don't call the police if you have a problem, that is dangerous for the cohesion of the society because we have rule of law in Austria. Another thing is if there's let's say prejudices that are furthered, or even more than prejudice, aggressive rhetoric against other minorities in the name of religion, then it's also something that should be looked into, and that we do. Like, for example, we found strong anti-Semitic views in some extremist literature. And since we have a very, we also have a Jewish community here, and we need to ensure that all religious communities are able to live in Vienna and practice their faith, this is something that we need to look into. So I try to be precise about how we do that. What we are not doing and what we're really, really trying to avoid is to talk about inner theological discussions. And the other thing is to avoid discrimination of any kind. We actually want to contribute that discrimination in any way is not a question. So,
do you also cooperate with the governments of Muslim majority societies? For instance, I wonder, or what do you think? How can they contribute? The governments of Muslim majority societies, can help European governments in tackling with all these issues? Do you think? What's your opinion?
That's a very difficult question because I'm not a politician. I am responsible for a research organization, basically.
Do you have any policy recommendation, let's say?
I'm not a politician and I'm not tasked with giving policy recommendations. But what I have been saying for the last 2 years and what I will continue to have as the guiding principle for our work is that we need, as a society, and I think that includes also governments of other countries or other countries in general, to ensure that we do have the democratic rule of law that we want so that everybody within it can prosper. You need to have open debate, open discussion. You need to be in a dialogue with each other. And that's something, for example, that we again have seen here in Austria, specifically the documentation center, because we published a report last year on one of the structures that we have here in Austria. We've been looking into them, if they have views that are questionable, if they're problematic ideas, narratives, and ideologies. And they actually approached us afterwards and are now saying they want to be in a cooperative dialogue with us and that they are trying to distance themselves from some of the more problematic views that have existed from the beginning within the organization. So I think that our work also helps associations and structures that we have here to free themselves of some extremist views and to come more in the middle of society, and also then be for the Muslim members of those associations that boost them a little bit.
One final question. If I'm not mistaken, it was French President Emmanuel Macron who suggested that Muslims in France must embrace a French Islam, whatever it includes. Even though other European states have not come up with their own Islams, yet I sense that there is a kind of, let's say, an ideal Islam in their minds, and Muslims are better embrace this particular type of Islam. Don't you think that this is against the very idea of the secular states European states have long cherished and preached globally?
Well, again, the documentation center has that very clear policy for us and guideline that we are not meddling in inner theological affairs, and what you're mentioning here is something that needs to be regarded as an inner Muslim dialogue, a debate for Muslim communities in Europe. So that's our stance as a documentation center. If there are countries in Europe that are trying to foster various developments that is their issue. But what we are trying to do is point out where there are extremist and problematic views, but we don't try to impose anything on anybody.
So you don't believe that there is any, let's talk about your own country here, Austrian state. So there is no ideal Islam that the government itself is imposing on Muslims to embrace, let's say.
Well, as I mentioned before, Islam has been recognized as a religion since 1912. We have a law prevailing for the translation now for the official name, I don't know the English, but we have an Islam law actually that covers how the state and the Muslim faith community are dealing with each other. And here the standard is along the same lines as just the same relationship as between the state and the Catholic Church and the state and the Orthodox Church or the state and the Jewish community. So we have in Austria there's by now I think 16 or 17 recognized religions and faith communities, and so Austria is treating them all according to the same standards, and I think that's very important to know and a good approach.
Okay, so let me ask you if you have any future goals. So as a center, what are your future plans? Are you planning to organize some other conferences or panels, or I don't know, some other reports? So what are the future goals? Let me ask you and then wrap up this conversation.
Well, you know, our task is always to research and document. That's something that's ongoing and all the time. Research projects sometimes take a little bit more time, a year or 2 years before we have results. So that's something that's ongoing. And since the conference that took place this week in Vienna, I think was very well received. I would say it was successful. And we had a lot of good feedback. It would be really good to have that repeated in the future, maybe on a very specific topic. I don't know yet. You need to look into that. What it definitely has shown is how important it is to gather together people from different expertises, areas, and fields. And that is something that's very necessary, to gather people together, literally in a room, to exchange ideas. And if we can do that again in the future, I think that would be good to do.
So good luck then. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evet, Saat Farkı'nı bu hafta böylece Viyana'dan noktalamış olduk. Önümüzdeki hafta yine farklı bir konuyla, farklı bir konukla görüşmek dileğiyle. Hoşçakalın.